And a hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 82 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me on this Thursday evening in New York. If you're checking out episode 82 on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, and are enjoying the content, don't forget to click like, subscribe, comment, turn on those notifications. Or if you're listening to the episode on one of the audio platforms, such as Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, or iHeartRadio, same general rule applies. If you like the content, click like, subscribe, comment, turn on those notifications. Today is the 48th anniversary of the United States release date for another hill I'll go down on, one of the greatest movies to come out of Hollywood in the last 50 years. And you can argue that it is one of the greatest movies in the history of cinema. Martin Scorsese's 1976 masterpiece, his forever masterpiece, Taxi Driver. And as many times as I've seen the movie, and as much as I studied it in film school at NYU back in the day, oddly enough, when the movie was less than 20 years old. It's kind of weird because it already seemed like it was so old in 1995, and it was a 1976 film. 2005 doesn't seem as long ago to now as 1976 did to 1995. But that's the way it goes as we age. But even with all of the reading I've done on the film, and I do consider myself a Martin Scorsese scholar. So the filmmakers that I would say that, because I know something about every legendary filmmaker you can throw at me, going back to the silent period, you want to give me, Cecil B. DeMille and D.W. Griffith and F.W. Murnau and P.W. Pabst and the French masters from Renoir, Truffaut, Japanese, Ozu, and Kurosawa, and Mizoguchi, and Fellini, and Antonioni, and every iconic filmmaker going back through time, Bertolucci. I consider myself a Scorsese scholar, a Hitchcock scholar, a Spielberg scholar, a Kubrick scholar. But until about 10 minutes ago, I had convinced myself that Martin Scorsese was nominated for Best Director because I never specifically studied years, nominations. It's not something that I really did. I know a lot of who won which awards in what year, but simply because I remember I read it somewhere else or I watched it on TV. I was under the impression that Scorsese had been nominated for Taxi Driver. He had not. So as absurd and egregious as it is that Rocky, a movie I love, let the record show, Rocky is a great movie. And John G. Avildsen's direction of Rocky, marvelous. Stallone's screenplay, fucking great. Martin Scorsese not getting at least a nomination for Taxi Driver is a joke and an outrage, especially because and it didn't win Best Picture. Rocky won Best Picture. It's outrageous he didn't win Best Director. More outrageous he wasn't even nominated. And it's impossible to conceive that it didn't win Best Picture, except, again, the Academy didn't want a movie as violent and nihilistic as Taxi Driver to represent it that year. But here's what grinds my gears on top of what I just said. So here it is, 48 years later, I'm pissed off. Taxi Driver won the top prize at the 1976 Cannes Film Festival, which, there's certainly a lot of debate. It's the French Oscars, basically. Now, many would argue it's more prestigious. I don't necessarily agree with that because there's political nonsense that goes on and has gone on at the Cannes Film Festival. This is not something only in Hollywood people make political speeches at the Oscars for decades. But Taxi Driver taking the major award, an American film taking the major award at the French Film Festival, it shows you that this is a movie of immense quality. And I should point out, another American film that took the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival, which also did not win Best Picture or Best Director, although Quentin Tarantino was nominated and Pulp Fiction was nominated for Best Picture, Pulp Fiction, at the 1994 Cannes Film Festival with Clint Eastwood as jury chairman, the man from Malpaso, fucking legend. He pushed He said he hadn't seen a movie like Pulp Fiction and he couldn't even remember the last time. And he spearheaded that jury and he said, this is the best movie we've seen, in or out of competition. Fuck all y'all. He didn't actually say fuck all y'all. The point is, Taxi Driver taking the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival a few months after its theatrical release in the United States. There were many critics in the US that objected to the movie's themes and tones and how bleak it was and the brutality and the perversions. A decade later, the same reaction that some real bad critics, people who in many cases did not give a film a fair chance, because you had a ton of people in 1986 saying that this was the best film of that year, did not win Best Picture. Oliver Stone's Platoon, great film, but I can go 20 years without watching Platoon. I'm Gucci. I'm good. I got to watch this movie every couple of months because it's that fucking brilliant, and I feel the same about Taxi Driver. And David Lynch and Martin Scorsese, thematically, they don't make the same kinds of movies, but they both gotten hosed by the Academy. And in the case of Lynch, there were a lot of mainstream critics. You know, he even joked about the fact that Siskel and Ebert didn't like a lot of their movie. Well, not so much Siskel, more Ebert. And then Ebert came around later on. He thought The Straight Story was an absolute masterpiece. That was another Lynch film, which was totally unlike his other work, at least on the surface. But awards aside, and the fact that I still can't believe that for all of the acclaim and accolades it's gotten, and Taxi Driver, you know, National Film Registry, it is generally regarded by film buffs, cineasts, critics. It is a legitimately great film and an experience to sit through, as is Blue Velvet, as is Pulp Fiction. There are some people who are not expecting it to be what it is. Because the movie, if you don't know what it's going to be, if all you know is it's a story about a lonely, disconnected, alienated former Vietnam veteran living in New York City, in the New York City of the 1970s, you know, and of course, as somebody who spent a lot of time in New York City, late 80s through the early 90s, the city in the 70s was like an open sewer in a lot of places, especially around Times Square. So that's the thing. People like to complain about the city. You know, not to get political, but de Blasio, a lot of people didn't like him. This guy sucks. He's this, he's that. Adams, everybody sucks. But the city is in so much better shape in every possible way now than in the 70s, in the 80s, and into the very early 90s. You know when it all changed? When they were able to remodel Bryant Park in about 1991 or 92. And then all of a sudden, they redid Times Square. And when I say the city planners, they figured out how to get all of this shit done, because there's often a lot of bureaucracy that keeps things from happening. And that's part of the point of this movie. That Travis Bickle, in his more cogent and coherent moments, like when he meets a potential vice presidential candidate, Senator Palantine, he talks about that there's so much crap, there's so much scum, and he doesn't just mean people, he just means in general. And it was all true. New York City of the 70s. And the thing is, there were segments, and another notorious movie, which I've discussed in a previous podcast, in addition to Goodfellas, Brian De Palma, Scorsese's old buddy, his adaptation of Tom Wolfe's Bonfire of the Vanities, that's a movie that takes place in the New York City of the late 80s, when there were huge chunks of the city that were garbage. But people still wanted to live in certain areas. You know, you can speak to larger issues with just what I said if you deconstruct the statement I made. Because by the late 80s, there was still, as I was saying, Times Square was still shit. You know, another Scorsese film, Bringing Out the Dead, is set in that 1989, 90, 91 area before New York City kind of rebuilt itself. And in Bonfire of the Vanities, Central Park West is still crazy expensive. There are still multi-million-dollar apartments that young people who have no business earning as much money as they're earning in the world of that film. Tom Hanks' character, Sherman McCoy, a bond trader. The guy's probably 33 or 34. He's dragging close to 7 figures a year. There were areas of the city that were always desirable, magnificent, gorgeous. And then there's the areas of the city in the world of Taxi Driver. And Travis Bickle, God's lonely man, prowling the streets. He doesn't know what to do with himself. He wants to connect. And there's so much. Here's the thing. This is a movie that speaks to a very disaffected, alienated person. And it's odd. When I first saw this movie as a much younger person, and I'm going to tell you a little history about myself. They didn't use the word incel, all right, when I was growing up. But I couldn't connect properly with other people either. Now, I didn't have paranoid delusions, and I didn't make up stories about I'm doing some work for the government, or I got a lot of funny ideas. No. But not being able to connect with people is real. Feelings of fear, isolation, abandonment, they're all real. So you can identify with the movie, but it doesn't mean you're cheerleading for Travis Bickle. And Leonardo DiCaprio, who as we see, he has worked with Scorsese and Mr. DeNiro many times. He's not necessarily known as an actor who has these sort of high-minded concepts when he watches movies. And he's talked about a lot of his different cinematic experience. And he's an interesting person to listen to, but it's not like listening to Martin Scorsese speaking a million miles a minute. But what DiCaprio said about Taxi Driver, it's so perfect. It may be the best thing that he's ever said in an interview. And I want to say that he was with Scorsese. It may have been when they were doing press for The Aviator, but I'm not sure about that. It could have even been later when he was talking about the Clint Eastwood movie he did, J. Edgar. But what he says is the way that Marty, meaning Scorsese, pulls the rug out from under you in Taxi Driver. The way that you see Travis, we understand he gave a lot for his country. We don't know all the mechanics of his military service, but he has a nasty scar. We can assume that he took some serious shit. He was in some serious shit, gave a lot for his country. We don't know if he volunteered or if he was drafted. We don't know any of that. It's not important. But we want to like him. We want to, and we do identify with him because he is supposed to be a young man, no more than 30, I don't believe. And De Niro was, in his early 30s at the time of this movie. He'd been around for a while. We identify with him. We see him try to make a connection with Sybil Shepherd's character of Betsy, who works for this senator that I mentioned, Palantine, to, try to gear up. And this is a guy who could end up becoming vice president. And we root for him. But he is so helpless socially. And that's something that when I first saw this movie, I was probably about 16 or 17. I feel like I had seen it by the time 1991 rolled around. I feel like I must have rented it from Blockbuster Video. It didn't get shown on HBO or Cinemax, to my knowledge, very often. It's strange how that worked, because Cinemax showed A Clockwork Orange and Full Metal Jacket, and some Kubrick films. And I had seen those, and you could argue A Clockwork Orange is even more fucked up than Taxi Driver, but that's a whole other podcast. But I identified with his attempts, and he actually got further along in the process than me. At least he was able to make a little bit of eye contact with Sybil Shepherd's Betsy. And we see that just in those interactions, his heart is in the right place. We think. Now, we don't know what the character is, he can give us his interior monologue, but as we see later in the film, that's a lot of bullshit. We don't know when he's telling us what he's really feeling. But based on what is presented, he does not meet Sybil Shepherd with bad intentions. He is trying to make a connection, and he simply can't because he is so alienated and so mixed up about what's right, what's proper, what's not. And we can argue that there's no such thing as right and proper, but we do know, we can say this, that under almost all circumstances through time, if you have a crush on a young lady, or if it's a young lady who has a crush on a guy, or if it's a young man who has a crush on another man, it doesn't matter what the mechanics of the courtship are. We are equal opportunity at this channel. It's not the point. But whatever it is, you try to make a connection. And if you're going on your first real date, don't take her to a peep show. Don't take him to a peep show. Or certainly don't surprise them with it. If you say, or maybe they'd say, hey, I'd really like to check out that nudie review. You talk about it ahead of time, no problem. But he makes this unbelievable mistake. Like, not even I would have made a mistake that, he got a lot further along than me. I couldn't even get someone's phone number because of the anxiety, the disconnection, and fear. And he doesn't operate from a point of fear when he approaches her and they interact. And as I say, he's making good eye contact. If you want me to say I don't think he's on the autism spectrum, I don't think he is. I don't think he's neurodivergent. I think he's just a guy who is very mentally ill. And he's able to hide it for stretches of the film. So when things don't work out, and Martin Scorsese has talked about this, it's painful. And there's a famous shot where he's trying to get in touch with Sybil Shepherd's Betsy on the phone, and she's pretty much blowing him off. She doesn't necessarily wish him ill will or hate him, but she does not want to have anything more to do with him. And this is what DiCaprio had talked about. Up until that moment, we can identify with what we've seen from Travis, how he's been presented to us. We can feel bad. But then he starts taking actions, doing things, and putting himself in situations where we can no longer abide by this. This is not the hero. This is not even an anti-hero. This is not lawful neutral or, that scale of good guys and bad guys. This is not even chaotic good or chaotic neutral. This is a dangerous individual who realistically should have a net thrown over him because it's not safe for him to move around. So the movie goes forth. And it's not really, it is a character study, but it's more or less a chronicle of a number of important days in Travis Bickle's life. And the ultimate genius of this film, and to me, why it's so rewatchable, because a movie like Blue Velvet and a movie like Taxi Driver should not have a rewatchability factor because it deals with such brutality, such sickness and horror, either body horror or horror of the mind. It should not be rewatchable. And it's tough to explain. I have difficulty watching Raging Bull again, which I know is a great film, but I find that to be endlessly unpleasant to sit through. And I feel the same about Goodfellas, which I know a lot of people that Goodfellas is one of their movies that I can sit and watch Goodfellas every day of the week and twice on Sunday. I love it so much. I think it's a great movie, as I feel that Raging Bull is also a masterpiece. It's in the top tier of Scorsese, the Holy Trinity, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, Taxi Driver. But Taxi Driver just does something else. And despite the depression aspects, the negativity, maybe it's the performances, maybe it's Scorsese's cameo, which comes out of nowhere and is amazing. Maybe it's Keitel, the strength of his performance, 12-year-old Jodie Foster. And you want to talk about controversy. There's an idea, and I'm not saying this is wrong, but there is an idea that we're too sensitive. Society, we used to be able to do more stuff and it's more restrictive. When Jodie Foster was cast in Taxi Driver, there was a significant amount of pushback. She's 12 years old. She's playing a prostitute. Like, that is a fucked up concept right there. And the movie doesn't run from it. But what it does do is it gives the opportunity, again, if you just look at the movie as a character study, there are certain components of Travis Bickle's brain that seem to be working properly. He does not wish harm to her. He doesn't understand why, like her why doesn't make any sense. And the ingeniousness of Paul Schrader, and he was nominated for Oscar for screenplay. The film did get a Best Picture nomination, and Jodie got a Best Supporting Actress nom, and De Niro was nominated for Best Actor. And unfortunately, Peter Finch, and Network was a movie a lot of people thought could have won Best Picture as well. It ain't Taxi Driver, it ain't even Rocky. It's a satire of TV, and it's in its own way a fantastic film. But Peter Finch, the actor who famously gave the "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore" speech, he passed, and he ended up winning Best Actor. And there was a sense that that's kind of, people may have voted for him because of that, because he was very well liked and well respected. But if you want to talk about craft, what De Niro does in Taxi Driver is something else. And I argued as far back as film school, it's one of the handful of transcendent film performances. They talk about Meryl Streep, Sophie's Choice, that level of holy shit, Max von Sydow in The Seventh Seal, whatever it is. What De Niro does in Taxi Driver, he makes you forget that he's an actor. You feel like you're watching this very sick man deteriorate right in front of you. And without getting into too much spoiler territory, because there are so many people who I know of who are movie fans who have not seen Taxi Driver, haven't seen Blue Velvet either. It is very difficult. It's strong stuff. But when I say it leaves you shaken, in this instance, you feel like you've witnessed something, And to go back to DiCaprio, because I didn't exactly complete that point. When Travis starts to go down this terrible rabbit hole, DiCaprio said he felt betrayed. And what he was kind of calming everybody down that he did not identify with Travis Bickle. I don't identify with Travis Bickle. He's not a hero. But what the movie does, the genius of Paul Schrader's script and the way Scorsese was able to pull it together, because you really have no idea what's going to happen in the third act. And the way that I've described it from a broad sense is when Travis can't connect properly with people. He's still pushing a cab, he's making his money, and he's trying to interact even with his fellow cabbies. And the late, great Peter Boyle is terrific as Wizard. He's kind of the slightly older cab driver that knows the ropes. And he legitimately tries to help Travis because Travis comes to him for help a few times. And he's the one on the receiving end of, I got some funny ideas. I got some bad ideas in my head, that kind of thing. And of course, all Peter Boyle can do is tell him, go get laid. As if that's the answer to all of your problems and all of society's ills. Just go get yourself a lady. Now, he tried to do it the conventional way, he couldn't. And, that's really not the greatest advice. But what the film ultimately does, it predicts the future, that people can become famous for the wrong reason. People can gain notoriety of all kinds for the wrong reasons. So let's just, without going into spoiler territory, let's just throw a couple of, for people who haven't seen the movie, and those who have will kind of be maybe smiling, knowing where I'm going with this. You have somebody who is at the end of their tether. They are mentally ill. Obviously, the VA ain't working so good because this guy needs care and he ain't getting any. Or if he is, some of the pills that he's taking, are they psychotropic drugs? We don't know. We don't know. There's whole things we don't know, and it's not important for the story. But when you see Travis kind of almost throw in the towel, writes a letter to his family, he's implying, I think this is it. He doesn't actually tell him that, but we know, okay, he's going to go out in a blaze of glory here. Arms himself to the teeth. He starts training and starts buying all kinds of high-tech weaponry. When I say high-tech, for the time, 44 Magnum, he's got a hand pistol, he's got all kinds of accoutrements. If he gets into it with somebody, he'll be able to, more than defend himself, he'll be able to dispense a lot of pain and death. Let's say that his idea is to assassinate a public figure. That is his version of, I want to really do something. It's his version of, oddly enough, 5 years later, a lunatic by the name of John Hinckley Jr., who saw Taxi Driver and then presumably became a fan of Jodie Foster, he tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan to impress Jodie Foster. So a lot of wackos out there. And for John Hinckley Jr., he identified with Travis Bickle a little bit too much, thinking that guy is anything other than a psychopath, a sociopath, probably a narcissist, and somebody that needed to not be among polite or even impolite society. But if you arm yourself to the teeth and your goal is, I'm going to assassinate a public figure, I got to do something, whatever it is, people will remember. He doesn't exactly say that. So let's say you go about your business and you try to set it up, you're one guy, and you realize that it's impossible. You're not going to be able to do what you want to do. Like there's no scenario in which you can achieve this particular goal of an assassination. So now you're agitated even more. you're even further down the rabbit hole of apparent madness. You get another quest in mind. And now your quest is, I need to do something for this person that I have become acquainted with who is in a terrible situation. And I want to try to get her out of this situation. So that's what he does. And without giving it away, the idea is that somebody who is deranged and mentally ill can still do something where society deems him a hero, where society says, wow, what a guy, what a man, what a man, what a man. Without saying, he's fucked up. Technically, he may have ended up doing something good, but it was almost by accident and only because his attempted assassination wasn't possible. And the film leaves you scratching your head. And at the time, I guarantee you there were people saying, well, this wouldn't happen like this. There's no way that the press would spin it that. They wouldn't even say spin. There's no way that this would end up like that. You watch the movie 48 years later, and you tell me that it is not exactly what would happen. Because how many people out there who have done really, really shitty things have ended up making tons of money, avoided prison time? Shouldn't the Tinder swindler have served a lot of prison time? Shouldn't the guy who married 300 women or the guy who had all those girlfriends and pretended he had a different birthday so that he would keep getting gifts? Like, there's so much shit. There's so much horrible behavior, not even borderline criminal behavior, but criminal behavior with once you get past the criminality and maybe a slap on the wrist, do-re mi, notoriety, reality TV show. It's the way it goes. I mean, 22 years after Taxi Driver, which teased a society in which it only matters if you're famous, not how you got there. The Truman Show with Jim Carrey, predicting that there's going to come a time where if you want to watch somebody 24/7, you can do it. You want to watch people have sex, we can live stream that too. You want to watch a guy take a crap, or you're into that, we can do that too. And Taxi Driver sets it up. It sets it in motion in 1976. We were moving towards a desensitized, less personalized society where everybody could be famous. Everyone could be a celebrity. Everybody could make a buck for the wrong kinds of actions. And, there is a legitimate debate, and I've had it. And this is not a one-way. It's another reason why this movie and other great films of the 70s like Dirty Harry, my all-time favorite, because you can argue, what is this movie really about? What is this movie telling you? And you can even argue the last 15 minutes of Taxi Driver. Here's what happens on the surface. I'm not giving it away. Here's what happens on the surface. Here's the subtext. Have at it. And that is an important... The fact that this movie can be interpreted so many different ways. The fact that Travis Bickle, God's lonely man, it's not cut and dried. The only thing that we're presented with that is cut and dried is he needs professional help. And realistically, he needs to be in a mental institution, not walking around society. And the movie, all these years later, has lost none of its power. It's not a product of its time. It's timeless. And that's the thing. There are movies in the 70s, second best movie decade after the 90s, in my opinion. Another hill I'm willing to go down on. The 90s were the greatest decade for Hollywood ever. But when I say a hill I'm willing to go down on, I'm talking about in reasoned debate with people, nothing terrible. When I say going down on a hill, I'll go down in the argument. If somebody comes in with 3 hours of material beating the crap out of me verbally that the 70s were better than the 90s. In immortal words of Mickey Rourke in the movie Get Carter, you want to do this little dance for old time's sake? Then bring it. Bring it. Good luck, as Liam said in Taken. Oh no, it was the guy on the phone with Liam. Good luck. I will find you. I will defeat you in that debate. Good luck. There are movies of the 70s that don't play anymore and that have certain anachronistic elements where you're scratching your head trying to understand why is this a big deal? Well, because this is new technology. You know, one of the all-time great movies, and we've seen it getting a lot of play on Netflix, Francis Coppola's The Conversation. Francis Coppola, of all people, all over social media. I love it. I love that Francis Coppola and Scorsese have embraced social media. I just think it's amazing and terrific of them. Because I guess at heart, they're creators. They love to especially Coppola loves to interact with fans. He does lives where he encourages questions from people he's never going to meet in real life. What did you think of this movie of mine? What did you think of One from the Heart? What did you think of The Conversation? But in the movie The Conversation, which is 2 years before Taxi Driver, there is tech in that movie where you're saying, what the fuck are they doing? Because a movie is about technology that is now outmoded and outdated. But the themes of privacy lost, the themes of this is none of my business, the themes of should I get involved even though I'm just hired to do a job and not get personally involved, those are timeless. And Taxi Driver, in a very dirty, dingy, scummy New York City, the movie will never not be great. And like A Clockwork Orange, it's the sort of film where if you take, your average, let's say a film fan, a Gen Z film fan, and you do a double bill of A Clockwork Orange and Taxi Driver, many of them will be shocked that movies like that were allowed to be made on the studio's dime. Clockwork Orange was produced through Warner Brothers. This was not an independent film where they were just able to do whatever the fuck they wanted. It was a literary adaptation. Warner Brothers put it through it. They had the issue in England where it wasn't allowed to be screened for 2 decades. But you watch Taxi Driver for the first time and you say, how are they able to make this movie? You wouldn't be able to do it the same today. That's true. But the 1970s were that fertile period where the so-called auteur directors, whether it was Kubrick, whether it was Arthur Penn, whether it was Robert Altman, whether it was Martin Scorsese, whether it was Spielberg, whether it was Kubrick, they had enormous amounts of creative freedom and very little studio interference. There was no, excuse me for bringing up his name, there was no Harvey Weinstein busting Scorsese's chops the way that he did as Marty was working his tail off to get Gangs of New York ready. And Weinstein really busted his chops. And there's very little of Martin Scorsese, fighting with studio executives, arguing with people. He doesn't like to do that. The fact that he went on record to say, I felt that Harvey was really not, the way that he talked to me was not okay when I was doing Gangs, that it wasn't good what he was doing, he probably means it a lot worse than that. But the people in charge of production of Taxi Driver clearly were very proud of the effort. And, you soak in the accolades when it wins the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival. That's a worldwide festival. And this was a top prize. You talk about a feather in the cap. As young as Martin was at the time, he was in his mid-30s. What was he, 30, 35? Was he even 35? Maybe 34? And for De Niro as well? If you haven't seen it, see it. See it. Light me up in the comments if you think the movie is a piece of crap. But again, before I close, just so you understand, Travis Bickle is not a man to be admired, adored, held up as somebody we want to be like. No. He is a product of a society that had decayed, product of a generation of young men who served their country and got fucked badly by a system that turned their back on them. That's where it has something in common with Born on the 4th of July, the Oliver Stone film, the true story about Ron Kovic, the kid from my old hometown in Massapequa who went to war. And then when he came home, everybody was giving him the finger. Nobody cared. Taxi Driver is a story of alienation. And unfortunately, people who were possibly destroyed by their experiences in Vietnam were never the same. And there are a lot of people that suffered flashbacks, that had been traumatized for life and were traumatized for life and had their lives shortened because of Agent Orange and the other defoliants that were sprayed on them to try to, cut down on the vegetation. Everything was bad. And that is another reason why it's important to understand the history. The Taxi Driver was not a movie made in a vacuum. It's timeless, but it came out at a very specific time in American history. It's not an accident that it's in the post-Vietnam era or that Travis Bickle, he doesn't just happen to be a Vietnam vet. He is somebody who was hurt in every way that a human being can be hurt by a system which chews up people like that, you could say to this day, chews up people like Travis Bickle, spits them out, doesn't make him a hero. He's somebody who needed professional help, needed to be under constant care, and wasn't. And lo and behold, what a great guy. No, what a fucked up guy. And what a disturbing movie. But what a fucking masterpiece. The best movie of Martin Scorsese's career, and one of the 2 or 3 greatest performances ever given in a motion picture. Robert DeNiro as Travis Bickle. And with that, we've reached the end of episode 82 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all. I know I got a little heated. I can't help it. There are certain movies that really get me going because I have such passion for them and about them. But if you checked out episode 82 on the YouTube channel, you enjoy the content, haven't done so already, really appreciate it if you click like, subscribe, comment, turn on those notifications. Or maybe you're in the car and you've just listened to this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify and iTunes, you haven't done so already, click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 83 real soon. Till then, peace.